Teams. Please note that external people should not switch on their cameras or their microphones at any time during the meeting. Can all members leave their cameras on but mute their microphone when not speaking? The microphone should only be switched on when you're invited to speak. I will now ask the clerk to advise the members participating today for all members to confirm their attendance once their name has been announced by the clerk, so it is clear in the recording of the meeting. As this local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the room or meeting during consideration of any application. I'll hand over to you, Mrs. McBain, now, please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my camera's not working, so I am here. Just indicate that you're present for the recording. So Councillor Bolton.
Here.
Councillor Bell.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Mason. Yep, I can see your hand up there. Thank you.
Okay. Right, that's super. Thank you, Councillor Mason. Okay, following the site visit undertaken for this application and the deferral of the consideration from the meeting of the 6th of October 2021, we will now turn to consider the first review in respect of a decision to refuse the application for a partial conversion of an existing coach house to domestic garage, including the erection of a single-storey extension, installation of a replacement door, formation of a garage door, and the installation of an electric vehicle charging point to the rear of 9 Marine Terrace, Aberdeen, planning reference 210677. We will now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal. The minute extract from the meeting of the 6th of October is also included in the agenda pack. I would point out Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will not, however, be asked to express any views on the merit of the proposed development, and in effect, his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. So if I could just hand over to you, Mr. Evans.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'll just share my screen entirely. Screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Great. So when we were on site at the visit this morning, I went through a description of the proposal and a description of the site. So unless you have any objection, I'll sort of refrain from doing so again and just run through the slides here and then pick up where we left off.
That sounds perfect. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Okay, so this is the location of the site we'll now be familiar with. The coach house in question being to the very bottom of the plot onto Marine Lane. And just an aerial photograph there. Tree cover doesn't really show you a lot. Images from the lane that we'll be familiar with as existing. And then what we have here is the existing and proposed elevation onto the lane. So on the top image here, you can see the faint outline there is where the applicant has estimated where an original opening would have stood, which has since been filled in with block work and then rendered over. And on the lower image is where the sectional timbered doors would be installed to allow access for vehicles from the lane. That's obviously the main intervention onto the lane side. The refurbishment of these hayloft doors and louvers is also part of the proposal, but arguably of lesser significance. Then onto the garden side, the garden elevation, you can see that the main intervention on the lower image here is the timber extension out into the garden area. This is 1.3 meters deep, so quite shallow in terms of the additional space it would provide internally. It's understood that that's in order to make it usable for the parking of vehicles, but occupies a fair width of this section of the coach house. It's 6.9 meters wide, I think we have it. And this just shows the gable elevation, looking from the neighbour at number 10. So no real change happening there, apart from you can see the extent of the timber extension peaking above the boundary wall. So in terms of the ground floor plan, this is how that manifests itself. So where we currently have the door onto the lane, and then this estimates the the section of the original opening, that would now be opened up to form a 5 metre wide opening with sectional door, which we heard from the homeowner would potentially curve around on a sort of rail there. And then in the garden side, you can see the extent to which that increases the footprint and the depth of the structure to allow for the parking of vehicles. You can just see the previous wall shown dashed there. First floor level, there's no real change happening. This just shows you the flat roof of the timber extension into the garden from above. And then, so just some sections through the building. So moving on then to the reasons for which the application was refused. A copy of the decision notice is included in full in the decision notice, but I'll just summarise the main points. Firstly, the officer concluded that the proposed works would detract from the character of the coach house, and considers that this coach house contributes significantly to the special historic and architectural interest of the listed building and the rear lane. Impact arises from the excessive removal of historic fabric, including granite, and alteration of the form of the building. The proposal was therefore felt to fail to accord with the statutory duty to have regard for the preservation and enhancement of the character and appearance of the conservation area, and would also conflict with policies D1 relating to design quality, D4 relating to the historic environment, D5 relating to the preservation of granite heritage of the Aberdeen Local Development Plan, as well as the applicable H1 residential areas policy. It was also felt that the proposal would be contrary to national policy, including Scottish planning policy and historic environment policy for Scotland, notably policy HEP4 within the latter, where the officers concluded that detrimental impact had not been demonstrated to be minimal. So the interventions are not as little as they might be to allow change. Turning then to the applicant's supporting case. This is set out in the notice of review along with an accompanying statement, both of which are available in the agenda pack. All documents provided as part of the planning application are available via the planning web portal. Again, just summarising the main points from the applicant's submission. These include, firstly, that the proposal complies with the vision and aims of the Strategic Development Plan and the relevant policies contained within the Local Development Plan. So that includes H1, D4, D5 and D1 as identified by the officer, as well as the relevant provisions of the associated supplementary guidance. Concludes that the proposal would have no adverse impact on the listed terrace or on any individual elements within that. Would have no impact on the character and appearance of the Marine Terrace Conservation Area by virtue of its location on a rear lane which provides no through access. Is consistent with the principles of SPP and HEPS in terms of facilitating positive change to the historic environment, and complies with the requirements of the relevant Historic Environment Scotland Managing Change guidance notes. On the basis that the application is felt to be supported by the development plan, and no material considerations have been indicated otherwise, the appellants and their agent contend that the review should be allowed and the application approved. Submission also points to a recent approval of an application reference 201069, which relates to King's College in Old Aberdeen, as demonstrating that later additions to a listed property will not necessarily have the same special architectural or historic interest as the main buildings with which they are associated. Also highlights the lack of objection from neighbours or any statutory consultees. Turning then to consultees, in this case, the Council's Roads Development Management team had no objection to the application, and the local Ferryhill and Rutherston Community Council provided no comments. There were no representations from members of the public. So we've obviously now undertaken a site visit. I think just for the purposes of completeness, convener, I think maybe members just need to indicate whether they feel they now have enough information to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Members, we obviously, as we've heard from Mr. Evans, you all experienced a site visit this morning. Can I just check now that you feel that you're satisfied that you have enough information to proceed today? Councillor Bell?
Yes, I'm happy with what I have seen and the information I have. Thank you, Camilla.
Councillor Mason? Where are you? Are you there, Councillor Mason? Tom, are you there?
Hold on, I think he's just dropped out. I'm trying to get him back.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. McBain. Yeah,
I see
hello?
he's back again.
Hi, Tom. Is it possible you can pop your camera on, or is it?
Yeah,
causing you
I
a
don't
problem?
know. I don't. Did you hear a buzzing noise?
No, couldn't hear anything.
No, because I had a buzzing noise which just came in, and I've had a few days ago. I had the same problem. It just they just started buzzing, and the only way to solve it was to come out and come back in again.
Okay, that's fine. You're there now, so that's what's
Okay.
important.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. What I said to Councillor Bell was we obviously undertook the site visit this morning. I just wanted to make sure that you're satisfied that no other procedure is required before us determining the application today, that you have enough information.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay, that's super. Thank you very much. Okay, now that we feel we have sufficient information, if I could perhaps ask Mr. Evans now to go into the relevant policies and other considerations, although you have done part of that already, but if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. Just get the presentation up here, convener. There we are. So yes, first and foremost, in the local development plan, the application site is zoned within a residential area where policy H1 applies. Policy H1 sets out that proposals for new development will be acceptable in principle if they satisfy the following criteria. Firstly, that they should not constitute overdevelopment. Secondly, that they should not have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area. So from the site visit this morning, members have been able to form their own view on that. Third, proposals should not result in the loss of valuable or valued areas of open space. There's no public open space affected by this proposal because it's within a private residential curtilage. And lastly, that proposals should comply with the relevant supplementary guidance. In this case, the householder development guide is of relevance, and I'll just come back to that momentarily. Next, policy D1 relating to quality placemaking by design requires development to be of a high standard and demonstrate an understanding of its context, linking to the following 6 qualities that are listed here. Then policy D4 relating to the historic environment states that Aberdeen City Council will protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment in line with national and local policy and guidance, and offers support for high quality design which respects the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment and protects the special architectural and historic interest of conservation areas. Policy H5, our granite heritage, sets out that the council will seek the retention and appropriate reuse, conversion and adaptation of all granite features, including granite curbs and boundary walls. Notes that partial demolition of any granite building or structure within a conservation area will not be granted unless the planning authority is satisfied that the proposed demolition meets Historic Environment Scotland's tests. In this case, the demolition, the works would be treated as an alteration generally rather than a works of demolition, so those tests apply in full. Also notes that where the retention and reuse of a granite feature is not viable, then the visible reuse of as much granite as a building material as possible will be required. Policy T2 relates to managing the transport impact of development. This is quite high level in terms of what policy actually says, but it includes a hook to the relevant transport and accessibility supplementary guidance, which includes more detailed commentary on garages and their dimensions and things like that. The householder development guide then, first and foremost, sets out a number of general principles for new development. Firstly, Extensions or alterations should be architecturally compatible with any original building in terms of design, scale, materials, and should not dominate or overwhelm an original building, with the original remaining visually dominant. Extensions should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example, through loss of privacy, daylight, or general amenity. Notes that approvals predating this guidance will not be considered to represent any sort of precedent for decision making, and also states that no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage of any plot should be covered by development. So turning then to the transport and accessibility supplementary guidance that I mentioned earlier, in terms of garages, this sets out some dimensions that are applicable. The minimum internal size of garage space should be no less than 5.7 meters by 2.7 meters. Sorry, I'm just flicking through the floor plan so that I can check that dimension for you. I think it might be listed earlier in my introduction. Yes, so the opening itself would be 5 meters wide onto the lane, and then the extension would provide an additional 1.3 meters of projection from the face of the building. So that would provide the requisite depth. Minimum effective entry width is 2.25 meters, so that's comfortably satisfied. Minimum entry height of 1.98 meters. Again, going by the elevations, that's comfortably adhered to. Scottish planning policy sets out the following in relation to listed buildings and conservation areas. Firstly, change to a listed building should be managed to protect its special interest while enabling it to remain in active use. So there's no embargo against alteration to listed buildings as such. It's more about the manner in which it's done. Special regard must be given to the importance of preserving and enhancing a building, its setting, and any features of special architectural or historic interest. The layout, design, materials, scale, siting and use of any development which will affect a listed building or its setting should be appropriate to the character and appearance of the building and its setting. Listed buildings should also be protected from demolition or other work that would adversely affect it or its setting. And also proposals in conservation areas should preserve or enhance the character and appearance of that conservation area. Proposals that do not harm the character or appearance should be treated as preserving it. Turning next to Historic Environment Policy for Scotland, this sets out the following key policy principles. These are all relevant to some extent, but policies HEP2 and HEP4 are perhaps particularly so. HEP2 stating that decisions affecting the historic environment should ensure that its understanding and enjoyment, as well as its benefits, are secured for present and future generations. And HEP4, changes to specific assets and their context should be managed in a way that protects the historic environment. Opportunities for enhancement should be identified where appropriate, and if detrimental impact on the historic environment is unavoidable, it should be minimised. Steps should be taken to demonstrate that alternatives have been explored and mitigation measures put in place. Historic Environment Scotland's Managing Change series includes a guidance note on the use and adaptation of listed buildings, and the key messages emphasise ensuring the long-term future of listed buildings in order to benefit from them in the long term. Demolition will always be the last resort, and there's an emphasis on finding new uses for listed buildings, and the emphasis will be on new uses with the least possible effect on things that make the building special. Decisions should always focus on the qualities that make them important, that is their special interest, and recognises that change will be necessary for buildings to stay in use long term, and proposals that keep buildings in use should be supported as long as they do the least possible harm. So just reiterating an earlier message, alterations are always preferable to losing a building entirely, and this also highlights the wider benefits of retaining listed buildings. A further Historic Environment Scotland guidance note on extensions states that proposals must protect the character and appearance of the building. they should be subordinate in scale and form. They should be located on a secondary elevation and must be designed in a high quality manner using appropriate materials. Extensions that would unbalance a symmetrical elevation and threaten the original design concept should be avoided. Highlights that small buildings can present challenges of scale, but may need extension to give them purpose. Suggests also that one way to maintain visual integrity of an original building may be to construct a lower link with an extension, and points out also that very small structures such as garden buildings not intended for permanent occupation will seldom be capable of extension. A proven need for additional accommodation might instead be met by a new freestanding and suitably scaled and designed structure either nearby or elsewhere. HAS's Managing Change guidance note on doorways sets out that the age, design, materials and features of doorways contribute to their interest. It's important to understand and protect those key characteristics. The importance of maintenance and repair is emphasised, and where elements cannot be repaired, replacement should match originals in their design as closely as possible. In terms of accessibility, Managing Change states a commitment to promoting equality of access to the historic environment. Where physical alterations are required, it's usually possible to achieve these improvements that are sensitive to historic character of a building through high quality design. As I mentioned, we're within the Marine Terrace Conservation Area, so the character appraisal and management plan for that conservation area is applicable. And the plan on the left illustrates the concentration of listed buildings within this conservation area. So this green stretch, if you can follow my cursor here, is this part Marine Terrace, and the red arrow there is just indicating the listed outbuilding to the back. Worth noting that the listing does extend to the outbuilding as well. Strengths of the conservation area identified as including that most buildings are in a good state of repair, with owners and occupiers generally sensitive to the historic character of the property and its setting. Weaknesses include some poor modern development, which is out of character with the rest of the area, for example, on Marine Terrace. Threats are seen as including infill development in back gardens for housing and car parks, for example, on Marine Lane, and unsympathetic development, which does not reflect or relate to the character of the conservation area. So, terms then of decision making and summing up. First and foremost, the zoning. Do members feel like this proposal complies with policy H1 and the tests that it set out, as well as the supplementary guidance contained in the Householder Development Guide? In terms of historic environment policy, do members feel that the proposal preserves or enhances the character and amenity of the conservation area and the special interest of the listed building as required by SPP, Historic Environment Scotland's policy for Scotland, and policies D4 and D5 of Local Development Plan. In terms of design quality, is a proposal of sufficient design quality and is it appropriate to its context, demonstrating due regard for that listing? So really ultimately coming to a conclusion of whether members feel the proposal complies with the development plan when considered as a whole, and whether then there are any material considerations weighing either for or against, and if those are of sufficient weight to overcome any conflict with the policies in the development plan. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, or assist with any conditions if members are so minded. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Members, questions for Mr. Evans? Councillor Bell?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, Councillor Mason?
No questions.
Okay, I think, we all obviously benefited from the site visit, and some of our, I think, probably questions that we would have asked would have been taken care of when we went to the site visits. So in accordance with the procedure note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case has now been considered and taken into account. So obviously, Councillor Bell and Councillor Mason, if we would like to have any discussion amongst ourselves in terms of how we feel about this application. Councillor Bell, would you like to kick off?
Thank you, Chair. Convener. I'm quite happy with what I saw, to be honest. I think I think actually that the proposed development is quite sympathetic to the area. It's a good reuse of a granite built coach house, I believe, and I think it actually the proposals would actually enhance it somewhat. The marine lane access is, although it's narrow, I believe there will be sufficient room to actually be able to get into the large door. I don't believe there will be any architectural adverse impact to the area, and I would actually propose that the planning permission be allowed, but just based on what I have seen, looking at the drawings and the site visit today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with Councillor Bell's comments. In effect, the only effect on the back lane is the garage door being a door which is being made bigger. The construction and the design is fairly consistent with the rest of the building, and in fact, it's better than a lot down the lane. And the extension on the garden side is okay. It is not quite the same character, but is internal and is not extreme in any sense. And overall, the development will enhance the property and keep it in good use. And it's much better kept in good use and therefore maintained, rather than a building which is not used and therefore deteriorates. And added to which they've got electrical plugs there for electric cars and so on. So overall, I think we should allow this one to go through.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mason. Perhaps I'll kind of finish off here. Yeah, I think that the site visit was actually very beneficial this morning. It gave us a view of as you say, the whole lane and the surrounding houses, some which, I can understand why we do create conservation areas when I see one or two of the developments on the edge of it, which are not sympathetic at all. But if we look at the application, I think that the applicant themselves have worked very hard to try and actually restore perhaps what it was like previously, because we saw there was actually a larger door in the original building, and the building itself has gone through numerous changes. You can see that with blocked up doors, patio doors and various other things. So actually, I think what they've done is brought it back with this application nearer to what it was previously, albeit with a slight extension into the garden. I think that using the wood actually will blend it into the garden far better, so it won't stand out. We've seen that it's not going to be particularly visible above the side walls, and you can see other rear gardens and some of the additions they've had in there, which are far more, I would suggest, out of keeping, and I don't believe in doing, because something else might not be is design compatible, that you make a second mistake, and I don't believe this one is a mistake. And I think that we are reusing, and I think if you look through lots of the historic supplementary guidance and policies, it keeps talking about how to enhance. Have we lost Councillor Mason?
I think he's just left again. Hold on a minute.
I'll wait till we get him back in for a continue.
Okay. Oh shoot. Wrong one.
Oh, he's back. We're okay. He's there.
My apologies, Chairman. I don't know how to deal with this problem.
Don't worry, Councillor Mason. Yeah, as I was saying, I think actually, if you look through much of the policies and supplementary guidance on historic and conservation areas, it talks about enhancing. It accepts that many times you're going to have to alter a building to make it usable.
And Scott, I didn't mean to dial you in. Sorry, you can just go. Sorry, I couldn't undial.
That's okay, don't worry. Yeah, so if we look at the householder guide, it talks about actual architectural compatibility to the original building, and I think the vast majority of the original coach building will be intact and will be enhanced, and a refurbishment of some of the original features I think will be welcome. I would agree with my colleagues that the rear lane is a bit of a mixed match rather than any consistent design pattern, which would have been of a historic nature. Again, D4 talks about alteration that rather than demolition, and that's what we're seeing in this case. T2, it talks about the access and the dimensions, etc. Again, we know that it complies with that. And again, the supplementary SPP, you know, again, it talks about managing change and enabling it to be used. So, you know, again, a lot of this is a sort of a judgment call in terms of design quality. The granite heritage, again, I would suggest that this, because it's not a demolition, it's just an alteration. I think I'm comfortable with that. If we look at, again, HEP4, again, the word enhancement comes through, and in the key messages, it's very much about recognition that change is necessary sometimes to make these buildings remain relevant and usable. And what we want to do is make sure that they're fit for purpose for, you know, whilst celebrating their historic nature, but make sure they're fit for purpose today. And we saw that with what we did at the art gallery, you know, and one of the examples that we saw obviously was down at Aberdeen University that was proposed by the applicant. So I think, you know, if we look at this in the context of the conservation area in Ferry Hill, I don't think this will detract. I think it will enhance the area because I think it will look far more relevant to the historic originality of the building than perhaps currently exists. So I'd be supporting my colleagues for the reasons I've just outlined to overturn the officer's recommendation. Can I just check, Mr. Evans, are you content, or do you feel there needs to be any conditions in terms of materials or anything?
Thank you, convener. Just having a look over the plans, there's a couple of things where maybe just further detail than is provided on the plans would be necessary. Where the new opening is to be formed for the garage door onto the lane, it refers to either new or recycled in-bands and out-bands, which is the sort of granite stones that sit around the opening. So the plan is for those to be reused. I think we would just want to see a detailed methodology for that. And if anything new is to be introduced because whatever stones aren't entirely salvageable, then we would just want to agree the specification for that. And other than that, just an agreement of materials and finishes for all elements of the proposal, so the timber cladding, any painted finishes, rough cast colours and samples and things like that. So fairly standard stuff.
Okay, we're happy with that, Councillor Bell? Yeah. With the conditions?
Yes, thank you. I was just
Councillor
getting to my
Mason?
microphone. Sorry, yes. Yeah,
okay.
those are fine, thank you.
Councillor Mason?
I'm quite happy with that, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Mrs. McBain, do you need to have any articulated comments beyond that?
No, that's fine. Everybody's in agreement to approve the application with the conditions as mentioned by Mr. Evans.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much, folks. We'll now move on, if you give me one moment, to the next application. So now turning to consideration of the second review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the change of use from amenity land to residential Cartage to form a paved area. It's retrospective at 3 Wellington Park, Cove, reference 210517. We will hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out again that Mr. Evans' attendance today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will, however, not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect his role will be a neutral one involved in the provision of factual information and guidance only. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, convener. Sorry, if you could just bear with me a moment. I'm just opening up my presentation. It's being a little slow.
That's no problem.
Sorry about this.
That's okay, no problem. And it's your birthday as well, Gavin.
Yes, best way to celebrate.
We'll sing to you at the end. No, I'm joking. Wouldn't do that to you.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to close something down because I think it's the root cause of all my problems here. Right. There you go. Hopefully you can see that now.
Yes, that's there. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so yes, thank you, Chair. So what we have before us here is a request for review against an application that was refused under delegated powers for change of use from amenity land to residential curtilage to form a paved area. It's a retrospective application, meaning that the works have already been carried out, and this took place at 3 Wellington Park, Cove. The review was found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the 3-month time limit following the appointed officer's decision. In terms of new information, the submitted notice of review states that the applicant has raised no new matters that were not before the appointed officer at the time of his or her decision. And in terms of procedure, the applicant has requested that members undertake a site inspection prior to coming to a decision on the application. So again, as usual, I'll outline some background to the case and then come back so members can decide whether they think that's necessary in this case. So turning to a site description, the application cites an area of approximately 27 square meters, which sits between numbers 3 and 4 Wellington Park. There are recently constructed dwellings which form part of the wider, these are recently constructed dwellings which form part of the wider Charleston development, allocated as OP56 in the adopted local development plan and consented via earlier applications dating from 2011 and 2016. The appointed officer's report notes that until recently the space was covered in soft landscaping and planting, having been laid out in connection with the wider residential development. The landscaping scheme for that consent included various species of planting and a single tree in this location. The area in question has, however, recently been incorporated into the curtilage of number 3 Wellington Park, which is the right-hand property if we're looking at this, and the one that has HT26 and plot 604 written on it there. So it's been incorporated into the plot of number 3 and resurfaced to provide an enlarged driveway for off-street car parking. It's accessible via the existing driveway and pavement crossing at number 3. This change of use and physical development has taken place without planning permission first being obtained. A narrow 0.5 metre strip is retained between the new area of driveway and the neighbouring property at number 4. So the strip in question just running down there. So that's just a zoomed in view that gives you a slightly better sense of it. So the finish of the driveway is just a continuation of what was already there at number 3. So permission is sought retrospectively for this change of use from amenity space to residential curtilage to incorporate it into the plot of number 3, and also for the installation of the extended area of block paving. The officer's report highlights that the application considers change of use and physical works, whereas matters relating to ownership of land and property rights are a separate legal matter between the parties. So just important to make that distinction. This is an extract from the first planning application consented for the wider Cove scheme. So we're looking at this this corner in the road, essentially this sort of slight kink. And you can see that the extent of the plots was different at that time. And there doesn't appear to have been any area of landscaping identified on that original consent. Subsequently, however, the house builder came back in for a further planning permission. So again, this is an extract from the landscaping scheme for that original, which shows no specific landscaping in this area. Whereas the more recent planning application from 2016 included a landscaping scheme which identified this area specifically for planting. This is a street view image which shows things as they currently stand. So the driveway for number 3 on the left in the darker shade here now extends across further to incorporate this area, sort of wedge shaped. There are further photos in the agenda pack which members hopefully have been able to access as well. I was trying to access an updated version of my presentation that had some additional photos in it, but can't seem to get that to open, I'm afraid. In terms of the appointed officer's reasons for the refusal, firstly, this would result in the loss of an area of open space which was required as part of the landscaping scheme for the wider Cove development. Notes that the landscaping in this location would have contributed to landscape character as it matured, but the proposal has resulted in the removal of a tree, or that tree not being planted in the first place potentially. Identifies conflict with policies H1 relating to residential areas and NE3 relating to urban green space from the local development plan, as well as the associated supplementary guidance documents and equivalent policies from the emerging proposed plan. Argues that this proposal creates an irregular residential boundary that does not correspond with the wider pattern of development in the area, and as a result identifies conflict with policy D1, quality placemaking by design. Argues that this results in over-provision of car parking for this property, contrary to policy aims that promote sustainable and active travel, and also identifying conflict with policy T2, which relates to managing the transport impact of development. Finally, states that change of use and physical works detract from the designed outlook and adversely affect residential amenity. The applicant's case, set out in the notice of review and an accompanying statement. Main points from this include a contention that the proposal does in fact comply with all the relevant policies of the local development plan, includes detailed commentary on each as well as a response to the reasons for refusal. Notes that the report of handling raises no concern regarding policies D2, NE8 and NE9, so compliance has been assumed. The report of handling advises that, if minded to approve, conditions might have been used to address matters relating to boundary treatments, such as requirement for a wall or fence, or landscaping, and drainage. The applicants have therefore concluded that the application could therefore not be refused on those matters. Clarifies that the area in question allows for only 1 additional car, not 2, as had been intimated in the officer's report of handling, and notes that the application also complies with the equivalent policies of the emerging proposed plan. Contends that, given compliance with the development plan and support from other material considerations, the review should therefore be allowed and permission granted. Highlights that the original planning permission from Cove, so that's reference 110065, does not appear to show landscaping in this area, with the space enclosed in either one or other residential curtilage. Recognises that the more recent planning permission for the Cove development from 2016 did show this as a landscaped area outside either residential plot. Contends that the materials used in the driveway match others, with a small strip retained to allow for a hedge or shrubs to be grown. Highlights also that the applicant would be very happy to introduce some form of enclosure along part of the site frontage to prevent vehicles from crossing over the non-lowered part of the pavement and sort of bumping down a curb. Suggests that that could be controlled by condition. Notes that the applicant's also willing to implement additional drainage if required, and that again could be controlled by condition. Points to the site's limited value as an area of open space as well. In terms of consultations, the Council's Roads Development Management team stated that the proposal is not acceptable as submitted because vehicles can access the site via the upstand kerb rather than the footway crossing, causing damage to the kerb and the footway. Notes that the existing footway crossing is at the maximum length permitted by current supplementary guidance, and also sits at a bend in the road, so no widening of that lowered section of the kerb would be supported by the Roads Development Management team. Roads indicate that they would only support an extended area of hard standing here if some kind of enclosure was to be introduced along the section of the front boundary, so whether that be a wall, fence, or some kind of landscaping to prevent people bumping down the kerb. There was no response received from the local Cove and Alton's Community Council. Excuse me. In terms of representations, there was one representation received at the time of the application. This is included in the agenda pack, so I won't reiterate. But in addition, having been notified of the review being sought, the same objector has made further representation to the review. Again, this is included in the agenda papers and raises the following main points. Firstly, queries the relevance of drawings from permission, the consent, if you like, from 2011, when there is a more recent permission from 2016, which would appear to supersede that original. Highlights that the 2017 permission clearly shows this area being landscaped, and contends that this landscaped wedge provided a natural separation between the plots and added some privacy for residents. Notes that the landscaped area was shown on the sales plan provided by Scotia Homes to prospective home buyers in July of 2019, and highlights that the loss of this landscaped area came after a fence to the property at number 3 Wellington Park had to be repositioned due to a discrepancy from the plan. Notes that neighbours were not advised of this change to introduce additional hard standing by the house builder, and argues that the application referred to 2 parking spaces, but the appeal submissions indicate a total of 3. Also argues that the narrow strip of ground which is retained for possible landscaping between the properties is inadequate and certainly would not compensate for the 27 square metre area lost, and would not allow for the growth of hedge or shrubs. Contends that photos submitted by the applicant showing rear parking courts are not comparable to this street fronting context, and encloses photos to demonstrate the rear parking areas also include areas of landscaping, such as that in question. Considers also that the works have adversely affected the appearance of the neighbour's property and reduced its value. So at that point, Convener, I'll just hand back to you for members to consider whether they wish to undertake any further procedure, and I'll see if I can get my hands on those additional photos.
Okay. Mr. Evans, could we have a look at Google Maps just to see if there's an up-to-date kind of photograph of that, so that we can maybe, before we decide whether we want some to go on site, sometimes those Google Street Maps or whatever you call them are quite helpful.
Well, this image that's in the presentation is taken from Google and is the most up-to-date and closest we could get to it, I'm afraid. Because it's a new development, they're a bit more limited.
Is it possible though to be able to have a wider visual out, so we can get a bit more of the sort of the context of that corner?
Okay, yep, I can certainly have a look at that. Yep.
Thank you.
So sorry, just need to stop sharing one screen and share the other.
Thank you.
So Google now has a, I think it's called a globe facility, which allows you to sort of pan and zoom, if you can see this.
Right. Yeah.
It's a little bit strange to look at. It looks almost like a watercolor painting the way it's done. But that allows us to get more of a sense of the wider context, if that helps.
Yeah. Can you move along toward if you're looking at the screen towards the right? Because I was just trying to see what other the treatment of other corners. Okay. I thought somebody had a hot tub at the front of their house, but I think it's just a bit of blue plastic. Okay.
Maybe a sort of communal bin that's in there.
Yeah. Okay. And they were talking about a strip of area that had been secured for landscaping. Is that where your arrow is?
Just by coincidence, yes, I think it is.
I thought you were.
There's a sort of half-meter strip along there between the two areas of hard surface.
Yeah. Because of course there's 3 cars sitting there at the moment, isn't there, in that picture?
Seems to be.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So how well, obviously the other picture that we've got on our packs is obviously, I think, I would imagine more up to date given the finish around it. Is that correct?
Sorry, if I can just have a
Yeah.
moment, I'll see what I can find in the agenda pack by way of pictures. If I can just stop sharing my screen
Yeah.
for a moment.
That's fine. Thank you, Gavin.
Okay.
Okay.
Right, I'll just share my screen again here, convener. Sorry
Thank you.
about the delay.
No, that's no problem. Probably a lot quicker than I am.
Here we are. Hopefully you can see that screen
yeah.
okay. I'll just make it full screen.
Okay,
Oh,
so that's the
just
rear
want
car
to-
park they were talking about.
Yeah, so the applicant submission includes some photos of rear car parking, sort of just for context, noting the amount of hard surfacing in the area. I think the appellant, the objector is making the point that yes, there are rear parking courts, which allows for parking to be contained within the rear where its visual impact is less, but even those do include areas of landscaping to help break them up. And if we scroll down, I think that's the point that's being made with this. And that's just a photo along the frontage, which shows, if you can see, that's just the start of the lowered curb there. So this area doesn't have the benefit of going straight out onto a dropped curb.
So how big was the original parking area? Is it just to the edge of the drop curb nearest to us?
Yes, I think it would be. I think it was to accommodate two cars within that area.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not sure. Yeah, so that gives an indication of what was envisaged at the time of the 2016 application anyway.
Okay, thank you. Right, members, we saw some additional photographs that I'll wait to see the other ones.
Sorry, yeah, I'll just scroll down.
Sorry.
So that's just looking back in the opposite direction. You can see on the left, that's the strip that's suggested could be capable of being landscaped to provide some relief in the hard standing area. That's probably a better view of it.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful.
And that's the end. That's the end as far as the photos are concerned.
That's super. Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Bell, obviously we've seen those photographs. There has been a request to attend a site visit, but do you feel that you've got sufficient information having looked at those photos and the street view, or do you wish to go on site?
No, I think actually that street view and the photographs really provide ample context for the area. Thank you, Kavina.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mason? Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Mason.
Thank you. No, I think the photographs provide adequate knowledge of the area. They're fairly comprehensive and clear. So
Okay.
I don't think a site visit will contribute too much.
Okay, and I would agree. I mean, I think that having that streetscape and being able to move around it certainly made me feel more comfortable. So we've obviously made the decision that we're happy to proceed today to make a considered view. So with that, if I could ask Mr. Evans, if you'd like to now go through the policies and other considerations.
Sure, thank you, convener. I'll just share my presentation again here. There we are. So yes, turning to the policies of the local development plan, starting off with policy H1, sites located in an H1 residential area, and states that proposals for new development will be accepted in principle, provided that they, or new residential development is, provided that they firstly do not constitute overdevelopment, secondly, do not have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area, thirdly, do not result in the loss of valuable or valued areas of open space. Now, with householder applications, we're often talking about how there's no open space affected because it's already within the curtilage of a plot. This application concerns exactly that point. It's incorporating something via a change of use into a private residential plot, which it would appear would otherwise be laid out as an area of landscaped open space. Obviously, an area of landscaped open space of fairly modest size, so there may be a limit to what sort of role or function that might have in terms of recreational use, but in terms of visual softening of a street scene, you may consider that it still has some value. And last point is that proposals should comply with supplementary guidance. In this case, the Householder Development Guide has some commentary on change of use of amenity ground, which I'll come back to shortly. Excuse me for a moment, I just need to cough a little bit.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So policy D1 then relates to quality placemaking by design, requiring development to be of a high standard and to demonstrate an understanding of its context. And we're looking for development to embody these 6 essential qualities. So it should be distinctive, welcoming, safe and pleasant, easy to walk around, adaptable and resource efficient. So it's for members to consider to what extent you feel those are relevant in this particular case in terms of the wider development and what role and function this area might have had. Policy N1 relating to the green space network sets out that the council will protect, promote and enhance the wildlife access, recreation, ecosystem, services and landscape value of the green space network, which is identified on the proposals map. Proposals for development that are likely to destroy or erode the character or function of the green space network will not be permitted. Where major infrastructure projects or other development necessitates crossing the green space network, such development should maintain and enhance the coherence of that network, and in doing so provision should be made for access across roads for wildlife and outdoor recreation. Master planning of new development should consider the existing areas of green space network and identify new areas incorporating green space network. And master plans will also determine the location, extent and configuration of green space network within the area and its connectivity with the network. It might be of assistance for me to just get something up on screen here. Because the green space network overlay applies to the entirety of this sort of surrounding area. If you can just see this mapping system on screen there. So this is our application site just on the corner here, and you can see that the green space network actually occupies a vast area, which incorporates, buildings, roads, and areas of green space. So it's perhaps important just to recognize that in terms of context. Sorry for the awkward bouncing between screens. It's not quite as smooth as I would like. Policy NE3 relating to urban green space states that permission will not be granted to redevelop parks, playing fields, or other areas of urban green space, including smaller areas which are not identified on the proposals map. It's for members really to consider to what extent you feel this represents an urban green space, or is a park, playing field, or other area of urban green space that warrants this protection. In all cases, development is only acceptable provided there's no significant loss to landscape character and amenity. Public access is either maintained or enhanced. Sites should be of no significant wildlife or heritage value and should not result in the loss of established or mature trees. Replacement green space of the same or better quality should be laid out in mitigation, and no adverse impact on watercourses, ponds, or wetlands should result. Proposals to develop outdoor sports facilities, that's not relevant, so can disregard that particular one. Moving on then to policy NE4, which relates to the provision of open space in new developments. This sets out that the council will require the provision of at least 2.8 hectares per 1,000 people of meaningful and useful open space in new residential developments. Supplementary guidance on open space and green infrastructure sets out further information on the types of provision and the expected accessibility and quality standards. Public or communal open space should be provided in all residential developments, including on brownfield sites. There is provision for some brownfield sites where that's not possible to include to attract commuted sums towards offsite provision or enhancement of existing open spaces, but that's not so relevant here. In areas where the open space audit has shown that an existing open space is of poor quality, contributions may be sought to enhance existing provision instead of new provision being made. And the open space audit and strategy provides details of any improvements or enhancements that may be required to open spaces in different areas of the city and how linkages between them may be improved. Policy NE5 is of some relevance relating to trees and woodlands, and the suggestion is that the landscaping scheme for the wider residential development required a tree to be planted in this location. It's unclear whether the tree was ever planted and has been removed or whether it was just never landscaped in the first place. I think the suggestion seems to be the latter. There's a presumption against development which would result in the loss of or damage to trees and woodlands that make various contributions. Buildings and services should be sited so as to minimise adverse impact on existing and future trees. And measures should be taken for the protection of long-term management of existing trees and new planting both before, during and after construction. And provision should also be made for tree protection measures during works. In terms of the Householder Development Guide, section 3.1.11 specifically deals with change of use from amenity ground to incorporate areas into private gardens, setting out these criteria. Firstly, it should not adversely affect spaces which make a worthwhile contribution to the character and amenity of an area. Proposals should not fragment or, if replicated, be likely to erode larger areas of open space or landscaping. They should not worsen or create a deficiency in recreational open space, and they should not result in a loss of visual amenity, including loss of or incorporation into private garden of existing trees or landscaping. So points to consider in decision making then, first and foremost, zoning. Do members feel that the proposal satisfies the criteria set out by policy H1 and the associated supplementary guidance that we've just heard from? In terms of design quality, is the proposal of sufficient design quality to satisfy policy D1, having regard for factors such as scale, siting, footprint, proportions, materials, etc.? And in particular, in terms of those 6 essential qualities, would it contribute to making the wider development welcoming or safe and pleasant? In terms of policy NE3, is the development of this area identified as green space network in the consent for the wider residential area consistent with policy NE3? Does it detract from the green space network or result in adverse impact on existing trees? And would there be any conflict with the policy aims of policy NE4 relating to the delivery of open space as part of new residential developments? So just coming back to the supplementary guidance then, does it fragment an area of open space? If repeated, would it be likely to erode a larger area? And would there be an adverse visual impact as a result of its incorporation into a private curtilage? happy to take any questions or assist with conditions if members are so minded. And I'll just hand back to you there, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Bell, have you any questions for Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Lena. I have a couple of questions. So I'm actually looking at the submission on page 181, just to some of the couple of the conditions that the applicant has actually said they'd be happy to actually put on this retrospective permission. I know you've mentioned them already, Mr. Evans, but I wonder if I could just perhaps explore them just a wee bit, because I'm not entirely sure what they mean. So 3.3 on page 181, it says, in addition, to ensure that access is not taken across the pavement, our client will be happy to introduce an appropriate hedge, fence or low wall along the boundary of the site. What would you consider to be an appropriate hedge? And I'm not entirely sure what that would actually add to this development. I'm sorry to ask for your opinion, but I'm completely stumped by this, to be honest.
No, I mean, I don't think you're really asking me for my opinion, to be honest, Councillor Bell. I think in terms of clarification, I think what the applicant's referring to there is putting up something which stands between a vehicle parked on the hard standing and the part of the pavement which doesn't feature a lowered kerb. So it's coming back to the roads authority or the roads development management team's comments about their main issue or concern about this being the bumping down over an upstood bit of kerb, and they were saying that they would be satisfied if there was something that would prevent that from happening. So I think the applicants are just looking to provide some kind of comfort that that's something they're quite happy to consider, whether it be a fence, a wall, or some kind of landscaping, I suppose, is for members to consider.
Right. I mean, it would be quite a difficult manoeuvre, wouldn't it? If there's only a section of dropped curb as opposed to the entire section of dropped curb. So anyway, that's for me to puzzle. So also there's also a point there about drainage, adding additional drainage. Is that actually an issue? Do you know? Because that's not something that's been picked up in the.
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent drainage has been really flagged as a concern. I'm not sure if that's come from the neighbour or if it's something that's been raised. Let me just quickly check the report of handling.
Thank you. I did actually have a look at the report, and it wasn't obvious, but
yeah, if there was any concern about the extent of the drainage and it being sort of sufficient to drain this extended area of hard standing, I would expect the report of handling to be making reference to. So if there's no reference in there, I'm not sure what the sort of rationale would be for requiring the applicant to go further.
No. Well, thank you. That's grand for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, convener. Mine is a practical question. If we uphold this as refusal, it ideally has to go back to it should go back to the green state where the planting of a tree. Who then becomes responsible for doing that? Will it become a sort of unknown quantity? Nobody takes ownership of it.
Well, that's a very good question. I couldn't say exactly who would be responsible, but there would be a separate matter for the planning authority to consider in terms of pursuing the enforcement of the planning conditions on the wider residential scheme, to say, there was a condition requiring green space here, that green space has not been delivered. So I think in the first instance, we may look to make contact with the house builder. If the homeowner is now the title keeper and the owner of the land, then that may complicate matters, but I don't think the LRB can really sort of second guess what might come later on through that process of investigation.
Do we have any precedent of what is substantially loss of green space?
I'm not sure I could point you to anything specific. No, I mean, it's it appears to be clear that a green space has been lost as a result of the proposal. It's perhaps just for members to come to their own view and how significant you feel that is.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's all I have for the moment.
Okay. Mr. Evans, can I just, on page 137, we have a consultee comments from our roads, Mr. Cowie. And in that, he said that he confirms that Roads Development Management have no objections to this application. Then on page 139, we have another memo from Mr. Cowie, which then gives a number of observations. So in conclusion, it says the Roads Development Management would not accept this application as it's currently presented. So it's kind of at odds with the original one, which said they don't have an objection to the current proposal. So I don't know if you can shine a light on it or if I'm missing something.
I'm not certain I can, to be perfectly honest. Could you give me those page numbers again?
Yeah, page 137 is the consultee's comments from Mr. Cowie, and then the memo is on page 139. So it's just a slight sort of contradiction in terms of what he said. One thing he's seeing no objection, then he's saying, but then it's not acceptable in the other one. So I was just a bit confused.
Just wondering about the date of these. There's a date on them. Oh, there's not a date on them.
No, that's what I tried to look for as well.
If I can just have a quick look on the planning portal, I should be able to clarify which came first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Evans.
Okay.
Because at 1.3 it does say, however, this has since been clarified to identify that this extended residential curtilage is to form increased driveway extent.
Yeah, the sort of web form type one that comes first was, well, comes first in order of sequence, was first chronologically. That was from the 16th of April. And then the subsequent response was from 16th of July. So I wonder if it was just, having reflected further on the proposal, other things came to light.
Okay, all right.
Speculating, I'm afraid.
Okay, no, that's fine, Mr. Evans. Excuse me, can I just switch off this phone? Apologies. Can I ask now, I suppose it's similar to Councillor Bell's now, that there was a suggestion by the applicant that they'd be prepared to do some amendments to create an appropriate hedge, fence or low wall. I suppose what I'm wanting to understand is, can we stipulate what it would be, i.e. it would have to be a hedge, for instance, if we were wanting to get some greening back in there. Is it possible as well that, they make reference to the that strip down between the two residential properties, which the suggestion is it's not wide enough to sustain an appropriate boundary definition in terms of planting. I don't know, is it possible that we if we were minded to approve, could we actually ask that strip was widened to be able to sustain an appropriate hedge? Or do we?
I think in theory, yes. Where this maybe requires closer inspection is just whether that strip is actually within, well, whose ownership and whose control it is within, because need to be careful with planning conditions that we're not obliging someone to do something on land that's out with their control, because then you really get into a pickle. But in terms of specifying the type of enclosure, if members were minded that they felt something in particular would be appropriate, you could certainly do that via a condition. And I think guidance suggests that you should be as precise and specific as you can in conditions.
Okay, and again, I was just trying to, could we maybe just have another look at the photograph where you can see the strip? There's because my photos are not particularly clear, because mine are in a printed copy.
Yep, that's no problem. 2 seconds. So that should be the images on screen. I think there were a couple that were quite useful. That one's quite close up.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, and then a few as well.
Just looking at the sort of the photo, that sort of the pages on the image on page 166, which is not a photograph but more of some sort of diagram. It would suggest that grassed area is in the applicant's ownership. I know it's not very clear, but certainly looking at that photograph, it would appear to be part of, I mean, given that if we would be widening it, if you look on the just over the lip bit, it looks like, that's obviously the way we'd want to widen it, so that is on the applicant's side.
Yeah.
If we were minded, I mean, because I think the greenery does absolutely add to the softening of the hard landscape. And I definitely want, depending on my colleagues, to implement some sort of greening of that space. And I'm not talking about a pot. And I'd want an evergreen type hedge, which would give a permanent barrier for the neighbour so that they have a level of privacy as they had expected. But I'm not saying Alan Titchmarsh, but as someone that does do a bit of gardening, just looking at it, I do wonder if it would sustain much more than some weeds in its current format, and that it would require to be widened slightly.
Yeah, I think, as you say, because any widening would be into the applicant's plot, then that would certainly seem to be within their control. The only thing to bear in mind, obviously we're talking about that strip as opposed to along the frontage like we were talking before, but the only thing to bear in mind with landscaping versus other types of enclosure is that a condition can require them to be implemented, and can potentially require them to be replaced if removed within a certain period of time. But you get onto increasingly tricky ground trying to deal with that in the longer term.
Yeah, but I suppose, if they had a wooden fence there, which I think would actually be detrimental to the kind of the open feel of that area. Fences can be removed, walls can be removed, so that there can be that, and I think for me it's the whole premise of the greening of that area to the front, as requested by Rhodes, to stop people from butting onto the curb, but also it will give a level of privacy and reinstatement of what should have been a greener wedge. So I'd be interested to hear from my colleagues, members. Obviously we've had our questions to Mr. Evans, so before we go into further discussion, is there any further questions for Mr. Evans at this stage? Councillor Bell?
No, I mean, I'm just when you look at the I know it's was it 27 square meters or whatever, but it's actually the drop curb, I think, is the fly in the ointment here, and what you can actually do.
Can I just check if you need any questions so that we can?
Yes, I know. Yes, yeah. I'm just. No, I don't know that. I have no questions. Thank you. I was talking aloud. Thank you. No questions. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Mason. You have any questions for Mr. Evans?
No, I think I've got enough questions, but was certainly worthy of further discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So we've obviously asked our questions of Mr. Evans. So it's for us now to decide that we have this, how we wish to proceed and discuss this and determine it. So we could now move into that. Councillor Bell, sorry, I interrupted you. If you want to continue.
No, I was just musing. I think I'm going to have to actually, in this case, just go by your judgment, convener. I mean, if I'm allowed to say this, I mean, I noticed there's a for sale sign outside the property, and I suspect that's what's actually brought this to light. I'm not over keen on retrospective planning applications, but I will say no more than that. Thank you.
Councillor Mason?
I think in terms of obviously it's just general parking at the moment, and to get it into any form of rationale with preventive fencing and landscaping, I think is fairly impractical in terms of effective parking. I don't know how the two cars will get in with that additional landscaping to prevent them going across the curb. So I think in terms of getting it sorted, I don't think it will ever happen. So I'm of a view that we should revert to green space, because then it would work quite well as green space, but it doesn't work well as car park.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Mason. Sorry, I think this one, you know, I think that, you know, the soft landscaping, green landscaping does enhance all these developments, and I think that that's part of the success of developments. And I know that Scotia Homes, certainly having looked at some of their other developments, you know, it's one of the key features of it. I understand what's been attempted to be done, and it's not the most important piece of green space, but I think it definitely contributes to the character. But I think if we could have had a slightly revised planning application rather than us trying to fiddle around it with conditions might be more appropriate. That way we can see in terms of how the cars would access, and, you know, taking on board Mr. Cowie's further comments, which, you know, talking about the drop curbs, etc. I think it probably would be, in my view, more practical to indicate from the local review body that we're minded that something can be done, but that would take a level of compromise in terms of the drop curb and also greening the space. But in the current situation, we would uphold the officer's recommendation, but indicate that, you know, there could be an appropriate scheme that could come forward without the complete removal of what's been put there. Would you say that's a fair summary, Councillor Bell?
I think that's a very fair summary, convener. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Councillor Mason.
Yes, I'll go along with that. It's certainly, I mean, obviously to get it completely back into green space is all at this stage almost impossible. But I think if they could come up with some sensible scheme which is thought through in completeness, I think it will be much better.
Yeah, I think that there is a compromise there, but as I say, I think it just gets a little bit complicated with us trying to make it work with the conditions, with maybe one or two questions still in our minds. So I think that's a unanimous decision that will uphold the officer's recommendation on this, but indicate that we do believe that there could be a compromise that could come forward in a further application. So Mrs. McBain, do you require anything further from us?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thanks, folks. Right, let me just move on. Right, moving now, turning to the consideration of the third review in respect of a decision to refuse the application for the erection of a double domestic garage to the front of 6 Cranfield Farm, Aberdeen, reference 210628. We will hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, which he has not, because he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr Evans, however, will not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development. In effect, his role will be neutral, one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Mr Evans.
Thank you, Convener. Just share the presentation with you here. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that okay.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you. Yes, the third case before us today, as you said, is for the erection of a domestic double garage to, the description is of at the front of 6 Cranfield Farm, Tarvis Road, Aberdeen. The review again has been found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the 3-month time limit following the appointed officer's decision. The notice of review in this case states that no new matters have been raised. The applicant has expressed satisfaction that the case can be considered without any further procedure, so not seeking a site visit or anything in this case. Start off with a description of the site. The application cites a detached dwelling which forms part of a wider steading conversion scheme. That conversion scheme resulted in a total of 7 new dwellings plus the original retained farmhouse. Location plans are, because they're at such a scale, it's quite tricky to work out, but on the left hand one you can just see as outlined in red, and then within that sort of conversion complex we're on the sort of the lower eastern edge. The application property is located in the southeast corner of that collection of larger collection of buildings and is visible from the B999 Aberdeen Potterton Road. And so that's just an even wider plan to give you an indication of just where we are. And then zoomed in from there. So visibility from this road, the B99, seems to be quite a central consideration in terms of the appointed officer's report. So the property comprises a converted traditional building along with a modern extension to its rear or to the south. So you can see those. This is the original sort of steading or bothy building, and then there's a link leading to the new section that comes out and makes it sort of a usable footprint as a dwelling house. So to the left on this site plan is as existing, and to the right is as proposed. Site lies approximately 1.5 kilometres from the northern outskirts of Aberdeen and sits within a rural setting in the designated green belt. In terms of planning history, an application from 2015 was the steading conversion to form these 7 dwellings with associated access and landscaping. That was approved in 2016. And then an application from from this year, 210660. That was for the erection of a garage on a different plot within this development. So that's plot 3, which is in the north eastern corner of the steading. That was approved on the 2nd of September 2021. The application was considered acceptable given its position in a secluded location within the wider site and the ancillary scale, massing, design and high quality materials used. So turning to the proposal, this application sought detailed planning permission for the construction of a detached double garage within the curtilage of 6 Cranfield Farm. The proposed garage would be located to the south of the dwelling. You can just see on the right hand image here, located midway along its western boundary. The single-storey structure would incorporate a gently sloping monopitch roof, which possibly show you better in some images. This is just a photo showing the approach along the B999. So you can see these fence posts just sort of give an indication of the boundary between the 2 properties. So this sort of timber section with central sort of stone chimney stack, that's the application property that we're looking at here. There's a better view of it again. This illustrates the extent of an existing retaining wall and the level change between different parts of the site. Sorry, I'm just going to skip forward to show you the elevations, and then we can come back a little bit because I always feel like it's best to get an idea of what you're looking at. So yes, the single-storey structure would incorporate a gently sloping monopitched roof and covers a footprint of approximately 7 metres wide by 6.65 metres deep, reaching a maximum height of 3.3 metres at its front edge, or 2.7 metres at the lower end being adjacent to the boundary. So this section is quite helpful there. So you can see that it's built up off the sort of retaining walls in sections, which means that the extent of its impact to that neighbouring property is reduced as a result. Sorry, I'll flick back through these again. So the western, sorry, the southern and western walls of the building. If we can go back to the site plan, sorry. So on the left-hand image, you can see as existing, this sort of heavy black dashed line indicates the extent of retaining walls, and you can see how that has affected the position of the garage structure. So it's built off that retaining wall at the southern and western elevations. Access is taken from a double width garage door in the eastern face of the building. Proposed finishing materials include Siberian larch, vertical timber cladding and chemney grey render on a smooth cement render base course for the walls, insulated profile panel roof in grey. Materials for the garage door and pass door are not specified on the plan, but it does indicate both would be given a grey finish. The officer's report notes that the southern stretch of the retaining wall and an area of additional hard standing, which is shown as gravel on the plans. So you can see these areas of gravel. Beyond the approved lock block spaces have actually been introduced without the benefit of planning permission. The report notes that these works are unauthorised and involve a breach of conditions attached to the original planning consent. Any enforcement action would be for the planning service to consider separately depending on the outcome of today's proceedings. But for the avoidance of doubt, as the retaining wall and hard standing are shown on the proposed drawings, these are within the scope of what would be approved if members opt to reverse the appointed officer's decision. So, through these, so there gives you an indication of that retaining wall we were talking about. That's the pocket into which the garage would be constructed. There's the footprint showing how you'd be accessed from the lock block onto the gravel and then through the double width garage door. Gives you an indication of the scale and the proximity to the property boundary shown dashed there. These sections are quite useful. This one in particular just showing the levels on the adjoining plot, if you like, and that helps us get a gauge for what the extent of the impact would be from that neighbour's perspective. These elevations again just sort of showing a similar thing, but with the materials and things added on to that. Some useful existing and proposed visualizations that have been provided by the applicant. So as we see, you've got that little pocket into which the retaining wall wraps around, and the structure would be incorporated there. So this is effectively the frontage of the house, you might argue, onto the sort of steading buildings. And an aerial visual as well, just to highlight that too. So the building's very much tucked around as far as the frontage property, and this is the front door, I believe, just in this section. So turning to the appointed officer's reasons for refusal, key points include the proposed garage, due to its siting, design and materials, is considered to detract from the visual amenity of the greenbelt. Proposal is considered to have a significant adverse impact on the character and appearance of the greenbelt. And policy conflicts were identified with policies NE2, greenbelt, and D1, design quality of the local development plan, as well as associated supplementary guidance on the conversion of buildings in the countryside, recognising that this forms part of a wider steading conversion scheme. The proposal was also considered to be in conflict with the equivalent policies of the emerging proposed plan. Turning then to the applicant's case, or the appellant's case, this is set out in a statement of support, which is available in the agenda pack. Main points include arguing that the proposal has less impact than other approved outbuildings in the surrounding area, highlighting that the refusal based on siting, design and material seems unpractical, highlighting the lack of objection from any notifiable neighbours, and also the earlier approval of a domestic store at a neighbouring property, albeit from 2014, the application, which is contended is much more imposing in terms of both height and materials. Contends that external finishes are consistent with the wider Cranfield steading conversion scheme, and makes reference to pre-application advice with the planning service when the principle of a garage in this location was accepted. Contends that there's no impact arising from overlooking or loss of privacy to neighbours, and highlights that the garage would be partially sunken into the ground to reduce its visual impact and its presence along the mutual boundary. Notes that the proposal for a garage on plot 3 was designed with, so this is the approved one that I mentioned earlier. So the approved scheme for the garage on plot 3 was designed with a different roof style. However, these two buildings would not be seen side by side in the same elevation because they're at different parts and separated by other buildings. Argues that a pitched or slated roof in this location would result in greater visual impact than the very shallow mono-pitched roof that's been used here. And encloses a letter of support from a resident at number 4 Cranfield Steading, who would see the structure in views south from their property. So in terms of visual impact, that's just suggesting that neighbours are not concerned. Encloses a photo with a mock-up to represent the height of the proposed structure. I think if I flick on, I can show you some of these. So I just roll back slightly. So I had mentioned that there was an application from 2014 that the applicant had referred to. So that is this domestic store over here, which reads somewhat more like an agricultural sort of building. Whether that's appropriate to its context or not, it's a matter of judgment. And then we also have the previously approved 628. Yes, sorry, this is our application site it's referring to. There's also the approval at plot number 3, but we can't see that from this view. There's an existing agricultural building also shown in this photo. So this is the mock-up that's been referred to. So the applicants have sort of gone out and measured the heights and put up some sort of wooden supports just to give an indication of what that would be like. Quite useful. You can get an indication of the scale and the extent of its effect on neighbours as well. So I'll come back to policy matters in a moment, but just thought I'd run through those photos as I was talking through the appellant's case here. So yes, also finally, contends that landscaping, which is yet to be completed in relation to the wider development, will assist in screening the proposed garage, and this could be supplemented by further planting if members were, for example, inclined to reverse the decision subject to conditions. In terms of consultations, the Council's Roads Development Management team had no objection to the proposal, and the local Bridge of Don Community Council provided no response. There were no representations from members of the public. So coming back to procedural matters, Chair, the applicant has suggested that they don't feel any further procedure is required in this case, but for members to come to their own view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Members, obviously we've heard from Mr. Evans and we've seen the photographs. There's been no request from the applicant for us to have a further procedure such as site visits or additional information to be provided. Can I just get that you're content to move forward with the determination today and that you have sufficient information? Councillor Bell.
Yes, I'm content. Thank you, Convener. I've got plenty of information. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Content.
And I am also content. So with us all being very content, we'll ask Mr. Evans if he could go through the policies, relevant policies and other considerations.
Of course. Okay, thank you, Convener. So I'm starting off with policy NE2, excuse me, relating to Greenbelt. The plan sets out that development will not be permitted in Greenbelt areas unless essential for a series of specified purposes. So those being agriculture, woodland or forestry, recreation compatible with an agricultural or natural setting, mineral extraction, quarrying or landscape renewal. The officer's report recognises that none of those apply and moves on from there to the next part of the policy, which sets out a number of further exceptions to that general restriction. the first of which provides for small-scale expansion of existing uses in the greenbelt. In this case, the existing residential use, has been established through the earlier granted planning permission, and it's for members to consider whether this represents a small-scale expansion to that existing use. Again, I would just point members to the appointed officer's report, which concluded that the proposed garage would be a small scale and therefore consistent with policy NE2 in that particular regard. Policy NE2 also requires that all development in greenbelt areas is of the highest quality in terms of siting, scale, design and materials. The officer's report refers to the siting of the garage on the prominent southern approach to the steading, the use of render on that elevation, the absence of approved landscaping to soften the southern edge of the development, and the additional hard-standing form to serve the garage as all being unsympathetic factors and failing to meet that requirement for the highest standards of design. It's obviously for members to come to their own conclusions on whether you agree with that conclusion. Policy D1 relates to quality placemaking by design, general requirement for all development to be of a high standard of design, which demonstrates an understanding of its context and has regard to the 6 characteristics listed here. Policy T2, relating to managing the transport impact of development, states a requirement for proposals to demonstrate that sufficient measures have been taken to minimise traffic generated and to maximise opportunities for sustainable and active travel. We've obviously heard that the residential unit or dwelling here has previously been approved, so I think you would argue that's already been established. In terms of the supplementary guidance, the Householder Development Guide has sections on general principles and outbuildings that are of relevance. The general principles sets out the proposal should be architecturally compatible with original houses and the surrounding area in terms of design, scale, materials, etc. It should not dominate or overwhelm an original dwelling and should remain visually subservient. Proposals should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected through, for example, loss of privacy, daylight, or general amenity. And approvals predating this guidance should not be taken to represent a precedent. Also, that no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage should be covered by development.
You all right, Gavin? Do you need
Sorry,
to take
yeah. No, it's okay.
Okay.
Just got a bit of a tickle in my throat. And as long as it's still okay from your end, I'm fine.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I just didn't want you to be uncomfortable.
The specific guidance on outbuildings sets out these criteria. So where planning permission is required, recognising that sometimes permitted development rights apply. Outbuildings must always be subordinate in scale to the dwelling, and 2-storey outbuildings will generally not be permitted. And this is, of course, a single-storey outbuilding. It's for members to come to their own view and whether you feel its scale is subordinate to the house itself. This criteria here is relating to second floors and roof space, which isn't applicable because it's a very shallow pitch with no loft area. Access to upper floors should be sited internally, again not applicable. Outbuildings should not have a negative impact on the character of the surrounding area, so a judgment to be made on what the character is in this particular location. Where highly visible, and especially in conservation areas, detached garages should be of a scale and design that respects the prevalent context of the surrounding area. I think the visibility of this approach to the steading does seem to have been given considerable weight in the officer's report. So whether you agree with that for you. Proposals will be assessed for their impact on the amenity of the area, for example, daylight, privacy, in the same way as extensions. So that we noticed from the sections and the mock-ups and photos that the level difference with the neighbouring property does substantially reduce the height close to the boundary. So it sort of follows that you might expect that the impact is reduced accordingly. Outbuildings will not usually be acceptable in front gardens because of the damaging impact development forward of a building line can have on the visual character of an area. Now, this application is described as being to the front in the application description, but if we look back to the sort of site plan and general arrangement of things, It's perhaps for members to come to their own view on that. I think it's very much an elongated plot from north to south, and the doors into the property, I understand, are these two sort of slightly yellowed areas there. So it's more like a steading arrangement where you don't have that same formal front and rear. So also, where else might a garage be accommodated on that plot? So turning then to the transport and accessibility supplementary guidance. This includes some detail on dimensions for garages. Minimum internal size of garage spaces should be no less than 5.7 by 2.7 meters. The internal area in this case is 6.2 by 6.5, so comfortably meets that. The minimum effective entry width is 2.25 meters. This is a 5 meter wide double garage door. And the minimum entry height is 1.98 meters. The vehicle opening and the section show a 2.4 meter high clearance. So seems to address all of those points. The supplementary guidance on conversion of buildings in the countryside has just a couple of sections that may be of relevance. Firstly, in relation to any new ancillary buildings, such as garages, for example, they should be justifiable and should respect the setting of the original building in terms of location, scale, massing, proportions, and the use of materials. So echoing some of the design policies in the householder guide to some extent. The conversion of buildings supplementary guidance does mention that harling will be acceptable on non-public elevations only. Granite matching coursing and masonry finish of original buildings original building is acceptable. The use of timber linings on a timber frame is a traditional form of construction that we're carefully designed can sit comfortably against granite rubble masonry found in many common forms of buildings in the countryside. So there's quite detailed commentary there on materials, but that is not specifically or explicitly talking about outbuildings, and it's talking about steading conversions in the general sense. So whether you feel like that needs to be quite so rigidly applied to an outbuilding such as a garage is perhaps a matter of judgment. So just in terms of decision making, points to focus on in terms of zoning, do members feel that this proposal satisfies the test set out by policy NE2 for development in the Greenbelt? So we've heard the conclusions that the appointed officer came to in terms of the scale of development, but then there's also the high standard of design required. In terms of design quality, do you feel the proposal complies with policy D1, having regard for scale, siting, footprint, proportions, and materials and the like? And do you feel it complies with the relevant supplementary guidance documents as they relate to domestic garages, outbuildings, and sort of domestic additions? So really just coming to a conclusion on whether you feel it complies with the development plan as a whole, and whether there are any material considerations separate from that weigh either in favour or against. Happy to take any questions or go back over any slides. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Bell, any questions for Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Lena. So, Mr. Evans, I can't see any provision for a battery, for an electric car charging point. That isn't going to be incorporated in this proposal, is it? I just missed it.
No, I certainly don't recall having seen anything to that effect, Councillor Bell.
No, okay, no, thanks. No, that was my only question, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Mason, any questions?
No questions, no.
No. I don't have any questions. I think you did a very good job, Mr. Evans, of preempting anything we might want to ask. Since I've constantly put Councillor Bell in the hot seat, I'll perhaps just kick off with this one myself. Now that we've finished questions, we're now determining the actual application. And for me, I actually don't have a problem with the design of the garages, and I don't see it as a conversion of an outbuilding or a steading, because it's actually a new build, and it's in amongst an awful lot of other buildings, and I think it'll be pretty hard to pick it out from the roadside. I think it's tied in really well in terms of the style of it with the house that it's attached, well, not attached to, but is sited by. I'm struggling to kind of find really anything negative about it. I understand, it complies basically with NE2, small scale expansion. It would be consistent with that. Oh, have we lost Councillor Mason?
Dropped off again.
Okay, I'll wait for him to come back before I
Yeah.
continue. Oh, he's back.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back, Councillor Mason. Yeah, so, in terms of NE2, I would say it's consistent with the small scale expansion. The design element of NE2 kind of laps over, I suppose, D1 in terms of design, and I actually think it fits in well with the development as a whole. T2 has obviously already been established with the principle of the development itself. Supplementary guide, householder guide, in terms of architecturally compatible, I think it does. And it certainly doesn't dominate or overwhelm it because it's sunken down, as we've seen. I think the scale is appropriate. We've heard that we've got a letter from a representation from the neighbours supporting it, so there's no negative impact on the amenity of the neighbours. It's a single story, so again, the scale is subordinate to the dwelling. I don't believe it has a negative impact on the character of the area. I think it, as I say, ties in really well. I appreciate that, we may want to discuss a landscape condition, but to be honest, given the setting that's in, I'm not necessarily sure that would be required. Again, I'll be happy to see what my colleagues say. Councillor Mason. You're still on mute.
Sorry, convenient, and I'm
That's
sorry
okay.
I have to keep on ducking out and coming back in again. But it's this technical problem that I have no idea why it's doing it.
No problem.
No, I concur almost entirely with what your comments, Karina. I think we were discussing landscaping to some extent, because I think some additional trees on the perimeter of the property might contribute to the hiding of the property if people are concerned about it. Because certainly in its new state, I think it will stick out somewhat. But maybe also the material for the driveway might be considered to be. I mean, that seems to have hit a snag in terms of original planning, and maybe some rather than extensive hard standing, whatever, maybe that could be limited in some extent to make sure that there is sufficient greenery incorporated within it, if that's possible.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Camilla. I think the incorporating the retaining wall into the garage actually will also mean that the visual impact will be negligible in that area. There's a hard standing area as well that already exists. I think it is actually a high quality development, and I picked up Siberian larch and render grey render finish, which again I think will be in keeping with that development. So I would concur with both of you that I see no reason why we shouldn't actually grant permission for this, along with any conditions you might want to place.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bell. Mr. Evans, can I ask, in terms of conditions, we have, I think, quite a lot of detail around the materials, but is there anything you would recommend that we might want to add?
I think the plans seem to be fairly comprehensive in terms of specifying the materials, so you probably it would be unnecessary to use a condition in that particular case. In terms of any additional landscaping members felt that was necessary, you could use a condition for that. Certainly, I think Councillor Mason had mentioned limiting the area of hard standing, and with that having been already constructed, I think that gets a bit problematic, and it's perhaps better for members to look at the proposal that's in front of them rather than try to alter it too much, because it just gets very tricky when you try and use conditions to alter the nature of what's in front of you. See what I mean?
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, and I think Councillor Bell actually mentioned the fact that, you know, there is a hard standing already that currently exists, regardless, that is part of the garage space at the moment. So as long as you're comfortable, Councillor Mason, I would just suggest we approve. I don't feel, given the setting of the area, that it is necessary to add any landscape. I think there's still some that have got to be implemented. Is that right, Mr. Evans?
Yes, I believe
Yeah.
so. I believe there's still outstanding landscaping from the sort of conversion scheme, if you like.
Yeah, so I think once that's put in, I think they'll be sufficient. So I'm happy just to grant the application and overturn the officer's recommendation. Can I get agreement, Councillor Bell?
Yeah,
Yes, I'm happy
And
with
Councillor
that,
Mason?
yes.
yes, I'm happy, yes.
Okay, right, thank you very much. Mrs. McBain, are you satisfied that we've given you the
Yep,
information?
That the application approved unconditionally.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, members, you'll be glad to know that we are now moving on to the final application for today. Let me just get to that piece of paper. Give me 2 moments. Right, here it is. Okay, now turning to consideration of the fourth review, which was deferred for more information at the meeting of the 6th of October 2021 in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the alteration and extension to the play barn at Winford Farm, Aberdeen, planning reference 210265. We will now hear from Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description on the application proposal. Again, the minute extract is included in the agenda pack from the meeting on the 6th of October 2021. Again, I would point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans, however, will not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Handing over to yourself, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, convener. I'll just get the presentation for this one up. There we are. So yes, this one will feel familiar to members, albeit it was some time ago that we previously looked at it. So this request for review is against an application refused under delegated powers for detailed planning permission for alterations and extension to the play barn at Winford Farm, Kings Wells. The review has been submitted with all necessary information and within the 3-month period. The notice of review advises that no new matters have been raised in these submissions. In terms of procedure, members will recall that they had requested further information from both INEOS as operators of pipeline and the health and safety executive. I'll come back to that shortly. Here we are. So in terms of a description of the site, the proposals are associated to Winford Farm and Play Barn, located on the C93C, the Borrowstone Road, Clinterty to Kingsford, to the west of Brimond Hill. The wider grounds extend as far as the city boundary, approximately 40 metres to the west. Winford Farm is approximately 1.2 kilometres northeast of West Hill and 2.1 kilometres northwest of Kings Wells. The wider complex comprises a 2-storey farmhouse and converted and extended steading with portal-framed sheds that forms the farm shop, cafe and play barn. There are several trees along the eastern boundary between the buildings and the road. You can maybe see that better from the aerial photo. Just north of the site, on the opposite side of the road, are large modern agricultural storage buildings associated to the operation of the farm. It's noted that there are a number of existing sheds and structures on site which are located to the west of the existing building and car park. These sheds appear to house birds and other types of animals and creatures as part of a visitor attraction. There's also a large play area to the west of the building, which includes sand pits and a pond to the southwest. An overspill car park is located, I think if you could just follow my cursor, that's the overspill car park down here. It's not accounted for within the existing parking numbers, which extend to 70 spaces at present, but it's understood that's only used on an occasional basis. The INEOS 40s Cruden Bay to Kinneil pipeline crosses through the southeastern corner of the site from north to south. The proposed works are within the inner notification zone of the pipeline for the purposes of involving the Health and Safety Executive. Additionally, the development area is within the inner zone of the Shell natural gas liquids pipeline that runs around 150 metres east of the 40s pipeline, so slightly further away. In terms of planning history, the original play barn use was approved in 2010, and so that was for the conversion of an existing steading and its extension to form a farm shop, cafe and play barn. So that was approved in August of 2010 and was notified to Scottish ministers due to an objection from the Health and Safety Executive, but ultimately ministers opted not to call it in for their own determination. In 2012, detailed planning permission was sought for an extension to the existing hardcore car park, including change of use from agricultural land to car parking. That application was made retrospectively and was withdrawn in 2015. A 2013 application sought detailed planning permission for an extension to the play barn. That was refused in March of 2014, with the decision subsequently reversed by the local review body. It's noted that HSE did not advise against planning permission being granted at that time. So turning to a description of the proposal then, got existing on the left and proposed on the right here. Detailed planning permission is sought for the extension to the existing building's west elevation to allow for an extension to the play barn's roof floor space. The extension would have a monopitched roof. So this shows the extension in terms of its footprint and zoomed in, the ground floor level, and then elevations as existing on top and as proposed on the lower one. And I think these ones show it best. So incorporating cladding roof and rendered walls. There we go. I think that's perhaps the best elevation to see it from that north view. So the extension would have a monopitch roof which extends from the existing roof plane and would encompass approximately 340 square meters of the site. The extension would measure approximately 26 by 18 meters and have a height of 6.4 meters where it joins the existing roof. Materials include rough cast render, insulated steel cladding, timber windows and translucent roof lights, all just matching the style of the existing building really. With regards to parking, while 70 spaces can be found within the site, at present, 2 spaces would be lost as a result of the proposed extension, taking it down to 68. The applicant has advised that within their supporting statement that there's no intention to increase visitor numbers to the business, and the additional play barn floor space is sought to allow for the safe movement of people within the facility and allow for enhanced COVID-19 precautions. There we go. That view, this view here is to the south facing the car park, so that's the one that will perhaps be most prominent. There's some photos, so just coming off that continuation of the roof slope there. And these photos just give an indication of what's in that area at the moment. So I'll just flick quickly through these and press on, but can come back as you wish. In terms of the appointed officer's reason for refusal, single reason stated, and that is that there had been a formal objection from the Health and Safety Executive who had raised concerns regarding the safety of the proposed development, and as such the proposal would not comply with policy B6 relating to pipelines, major hazards and explosive sites in the local development plan. Turning to the appellant's case, the appellant submitted a supporting statement which is available in the agenda pack along with a further later response. Main points are as follows. Firstly, the notes that the application was refused solely on the basis of that objection from HSE and the subsequent conflict with policy B6, and that the proposal was found to be acceptable in other regards. Contends that the proposed extension is not intended to cater for an increased number of visitors. highlights that the works would result in the loss of 2 existing car parking spaces, and contends that HSE's position is not consistent with the decisions previously taken by the planning authority in terms of decisions taken by the planning authority to as regards the extent of the risk. Highlights that HSE has not applied its extension rule, which can reduce the sensitivity level if the population would not increase by more than 10%. Contends that the number of visitors is limited by the amount of parking on site, as the site's not readily reachable by other means, and that formation of new parking would require planning permission in its own right. Visitor numbers are further regulated by a requirement for online booking in advance, and notes that the extension would allow for greater space for indoor COVID-19 safety by allowing for one-way systems and greater separation between staff and visitors. Sorry, just jumping on prematurely there. In terms of consultation, copies of these are included in the agenda. There are quite a few and they're quite lengthy. The Council's Roads Development Management team initially raised concerns regarding insufficient parking. However, on receipt of further information and on reviewing the amended proposal, roads officers have advised that the existing parking arrangement minus 2 spaces as a result of the proposal is sufficient to serve the floor space proposed. The Council's Waste and Recycling team has provided general comments regarding waste facilities and for commercial premises, but has no objection. Environmental Health colleagues have no comments to make on the proposal. The INEOS 40s pipeline system has advised that the proposal has been reviewed and that the safety and integrity of the pipeline would not be affected in their view. The Health and Safety Executive has highlighted the need to consult with the operators of the other 2 adjacent pipelines and states that there are sufficient reasons in their view that on safety grounds they should advise against the granting of planning permission in this case. Shell UK advised that there was no reason why the development and associated construction works would directly affect their pipeline servitude strip or the safety or integrity of their pipeline. The local community council, that's Bucksburn and New Hills, provided no response, and there were no representations from members of the public. So turning then to the further information that's been provided following members' requests. This is included in the agenda pack, and the response from HSE in particular is quite comprehensive, or quite detailed certainly. But just go through these in brief. So Councillor Mason had requested further information from HSE as follows. So firstly I think this may in fact be from Councillor Bell. Anyway, the local review body had requested that HSE provide a complete set of guidance notes to assist the LRB in understanding the methodology that led to HSE's recommendations. I'd also asked it to provide further information to clarify how the consultation distance is derived. And thirdly, to clarify whether the assumptions made by HSE in advising on this application are the same as those used when advising ACC on planning permission for the play barn on the site previously or originally in 2010. So HSE's response is at pages 369 to 373 of the agenda pack. It clarifies that HSE advised against the grant of planning permission originally for the play barn in this location, and responded to the Scottish Government following Aberdeen City Council's willingness to approve. So HSE confirmed to the Scottish Government that HSE's advice against granting the planning permission remained. However, HSE would not request that the case be called in for the Scottish Minister's own determination. HSE has also advised against the latest application for the extension of the play barn. So really just first and foremost reiterating that HSE's position has always remained to advise against both the initial institution of the use and then its subsequent expansion. So HSE's provided background on the methodology that they apply, setting out the sensitivity levels used and directing members to a decision matrix within HSE's land use planning methodology. reiterates the HSE view that this was an inappropriate location for a new development involving members of the public. So there's a quote that I've taken from that states that while the likelihood of an accident is low, the consequences could be catastrophic. Also confirms in relation to the extension rule that the applicant has raised, this has not been considered by HSE in this case due to the clear history of their advising against planning permission in this location. The extension rule, in their view, is intended to allow for development that existed prior to HSE's statutory role in the pipeline safeguarding process, to be maintained with minimal additional people put at risk. Does note, however, that if the LRB is satisfied that there will be no foreseeable increase in the number of people as a result of this extra floor space, then it has the discretion to make that judgment. HSE's response also clarifies that consultation zones for the BP40's pipeline were established using a computerized method of quantified risk assessment of residual risk, which took account of details including pipeline diameter, wall thickness and pressure of fluid. In terms of point 3, the current consultation zones were set by HSE in 1992 and have subsequently been reviewed in 2000, 2005, around 2011 and in 2017, but have always remained unchanged following those reviews. Notes that the Shell Expro NGL pipeline was reassessed in January 2017, resulting in some changes to its consultation zones, but HSE note that the principal focus of their interest here is not on that pipeline. You follow me? The LRB also sought information from INEOS as operators of the Forties pipeline to establish when the pipeline was last pigged with an intelligent tool for pipeline integrity purposes. INEOS's response is fairly brief at page 375 of the agenda pack, advising that the Forties pipeline was last subject to line inspection, known as intelligent pigging, in 2019, so not so very long ago. At that point, convener, I think I would just hand back to you to establish if members feel there's any further procedure required before we proceed on to policy matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. I put my mute on because I was shuffling papers and I don't want to interrupt your flow. Members, we've had an additional process by asking for additional information. Other than that, are you content that we're in a position now to determine this application today? Councillor Bell?
We probably are in a position to determine the application today, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Mason?
Yes, the additional health and safety executive information was incredibly useful.
Okay. Thank you very
much. I'm now going to apply for a job in the future.
What, in the play barn?
No, in the.
I'm joking, Councillor Mason. Sorry. Okay, so we've all considered that we have sufficient information in front of us today now with additional information, to take a decision. What I'll now do is ask Mr. Evans, as part of the procedure note, to go through the relevant policies and considerations. Mr. Evans.
Sorry, convener, I didn't realise I was muted and I was happily talking away there. Just getting the presentation up. I'll carry on now. Thank you. So yes, turning to the local development plan. As I mentioned, the site's located in the Greenbelt, so policy NE2 applies, and this sets out that no development will be permitted in the Greenbelt for purposes other than those listed here. So that's agriculture, woodland and forestry, recreational uses that are compatible with an agricultural or natural setting, mineral extraction or quarry restoration, or landscape renewal. We're obviously talking about an established use and its expansion here. So there are also a number of further exceptions set out, which allows for proposals, for development with existing activities in the Greenbelt, essential infrastructure, conversion of buildings of architectural or historic interest, and replacement houses on a one-for-one basis. So the appointed officers report accepted that the scale of extension is broadly small scale and relates to existing activities undertaken within the Greenbelt, so no particular policy conflict was identified there. As we heard on the last case, policy NE2 also requires that all proposals for development in the Greenbelt must be of the highest quality in terms of siting, design, scale and materials. That then takes us to policy D. Oh, sorry, I must have missed a slide. That then takes us to policy D1. Sorry, my slides seem to be a little bit out of order with my spiel. Policy D1 relates to quality placemaking by design, requiring development to be of a high standard, which demonstrates an understanding of its context and links to these 6 essential qualities. Policy T2, somewhere here, there it is, relates to managing the transport impact of development and states a requirement for proposals to demonstrate that sufficient measures have been taken to minimise traffic generated and maximise the opportunities for sustainable and active travel. Now, this is perhaps not the most sustainable location, being somewhat difficult to reach by any means other than a car. However, with it being an existing use, you might feel that particular issue has already been sort of considered. Next is policy B6, which is really the crux of the matter, relating to pipelines, major hazards and explosive storage sites. Highlights the presence of high pressure pipelines within the city, which involve transfer of hazardous and/or explosive substances, and explains that due to the risks associated with such pipelines, consultation zones have been established with the Health and Safety Executive, whereby they will be consulted on applications for planning permission with a view to ensuring that only appropriate new or replacement development takes place and there's no increased risk to public safety. That point, increased risk to public safety, appears to be the nub of things here. And in HSE's response, they made the point that it's really for members to decide whether you feel that there would be an increased number of people put at risk here, but nevertheless, they have advised it against. Policy B6 also highlights that we will also consult with the operators of the pipelines. However, their concern is principally in the integrity of their own pipeline rather than public safeguarding. Other relevant policies include policy T3 relating to sustainable and active travel. There's an emphasis on encouraging active and sustainable travel. As I mentioned before, that ship is perhaps sailed in terms of the location of the site, but nevertheless, might want to consider to what extent this increases the capacity or scope for unsustainable travel patterns. So in decision making, really then, points for consideration, first and foremost, policy NE2 relating to the Greenbelt, whether you feel this is an appropriate type of development that's provided for by NE2. In terms of design quality, do you feel the proposal is of the highest design quality as required by policy NE2 and echoed by policy D1? And then centrally, in relation to pipelines and policy B6, the members consider that the application should be refused in line with the advice from HSE, or does the LRB consider that there's merit in the arguments put forward by the applicant, which focus heavily on this not being an increase in capacity or number of visitors, which it's been suggested that that would be to some extent self-regulating, because the number of parking spaces and the fact that you can only get there by car would mean that capacity would sort of take care of itself. So ultimately, whether you feel members that the proposal complies with the development plan, and if there are any other material considerations that we either for or against. Happy to take any questions, and back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. And I'm going to put Councillor Bell back in the spotlight because this is more one of his forte in terms of pipelines. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Galina. Forte, do you mean Forties? That's what the pipeline used to be called, the Forties pipeline. So can I please ask, there's a report that W.S. Atkins have produced, and it starts on page 451. Appendix 7, SRI calculations, strategic risk integer calculations. Is that a new report, or was that actually in the pack when we last looked at this planning application?
If you can bear with me just a second,
Thank you.
about my agenda pack's just loading up. Page 451 was it you said?
Yeah, that's where it starts. Yeah, it's a 3-page.
It's funny because our pages are different.
Oh,
Yeah, but it could be.
oh, I'm sorry. Actually, it's
Yeah.
451 on the numbered on the thing, but if it's 452 in the PDF document, apologies.
Yes. Now, if this is what I think it is, I believe this was provided at the time of the original approval.
Okay.
You can see it. Yeah, I do no. The cover sheet there has December 2009, Councillor Bell. So this isn't a new report.
No. Okay. Okay. Thanks. No, that was
What
my
you
only
said,
question.
were you meaning was it submitted as part of the original pack to us? Is that
Yeah.
rather
Or,
than?
yes.
Yeah.
Or
I think it should have been, yeah.
Is it in a subsequent submission after actually asking about the integrity of the pipeline?
I see. No, it's
No.
not a new submission. My
Okay.
understanding is that was provided to try and persuade members at the time of the original application that they could disregard or set aside the HSE's advise against position because there'd been, a more detailed assessment carried out by that consultant.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. That was the only question I had actually. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mason, have you got any questions?
No, Karina, I think I've got all the information I need to come to some conclusion.
Yeah. Okay, well, members, we've obviously asked questions from Mr. Evans, and we have information in front of us. So I think now, in accordance with the procedure, we can discuss the application and come to a determination. Perhaps I'll kick off slightly on this one, and I'm sure Councillor Bell will probably be able to interject with some of his knowledge. It's quite a difficult one because obviously, when we get any health and safety executive objections, we give it full cognizance. And actually, I recall we had one back in June, which was for the redevelopment of an office block in Dice, where HSE actually objected to it, and it was being turned into, originally it was being called a hospital, but they changed it to clinic, so that there would be no overnight stays, so people would be attending for procedures there. Now that one was actually recommended for approval, and it went down to, obviously, to the Scottish Government to see if they wanted to call it in. And obviously there'd been a previous use on that development for offices, and it was being changed to make use of the building, and it was next to a Cartage site, which, as I say, the health and safety executive objected to, but what have we lost, Councillor Masson? He's gone again. We'll wait for him to come back.
That's him back.
Okay, thank you. So, it's quite good being, having the kind of the wider sort of citing of applications to give me a little bit more kind of knowledge. And, I just wanted to share that with yourselves, Councillor Bell and Masson, that, we did have earlier. And I suppose we have the Atkins report. The fact that the HSE didn't require the Scottish Government to call it in when it was the main part of the development, we're being told that there's not going to be necessarily much of an increase in terms of numbers of people. And it's quite a wide number that the health and safety executive work from 101 people to 1,000. That's quite a substantial range. And, we're looking, I think it was about 130, 140 people. I've lost a bit of that in March in my that they reckon that could potentially be there at any one time. And again, I would have, I know that there's concerns that there'll be children, but and those be classes potentially vulnerable, but I can't see many children getting there without having an adult to take them. And having attended these types of things before myself, when my children were of that age group, you're there maybe for an hour, maybe 2 hours at a time. So again, the window of people being there for any significant time does move, and I think, different times of the year, maybe holiday times or or after nursery is finished, we'll see a little spike in terms of people attending. But I do have mixed views around this, and I'm kind of leaning towards approval, just because I have the safeguard that if the Scottish Government want to, and HSE this time decides that they would like them to call it in, there is that kind of safeguard. But again, I'm interested to hear what my colleagues have got to say. Councillor Bell, I'll maybe ask you.
Thank you, Selena. So my concern with the original application that we looked at was the integrity of the Forties pipeline that is now operated by INEOS. INEOS have actually said that they last actually put an intelligent pig down the pipeline 2019 to test for the integrity. Now I think that was actually after there was an issue with the pipeline. It was actually with the valve. I'm sure that was way before then, to be honest. So as far as I'm concerned, the pipeline integrity is reassured. HSE also said that there should be further consultation with the operators, and I think that's happened. And again, the operators, both INEOS and Shell, for two different pipelines, have said that they're quite happy with the integrity of the pipelines. I'm also minded as well that there's a probabilistic calculation that Atkins performed, and I know that was some while ago, but the numbers so this thing called a strategic risk integer, an SRI, it's a probabilistic value, and they calculated a worst case value. So with an additional 100 people, they said that this value, this SRI, will be 71,000. So I mean, that's fairly meaningless, but in context with this, apparently 500,000 is the value which the HSE would automatically call in the proposal. So with 100 extra people, they've got 71,000 as opposed to 500,000 as being the drop dead, if you pardon the pun, number, and they have no issue at all. So probabilistically, in terms of accident, Atkins were really fine with it. INEOS are fine with it. So by sort of connection, HSE must be fine, because there's been consultation with the pipeline operators again. So I have no objection at all now. Thanks, Camilla.
Okay, thank you. And it's been really helpful for me, Councillor Bell, because, as I say, I knew the kind of the skill set that you have. So, I was really pleased that you asked those for that additional information and gave us a bit more confidence around the examination of that information itself. Councillor Mason.
Yes, Kavina, the various models being used by HSE and whatever are obviously just a model, and therefore you need to be careful about the inputs and outputs and the sensitivity to the model has. And it seems to me that there is not an overwhelming case for any increased danger to the public. I mean, given in some ways we shouldn't be here. If we don't approve this one, we shouldn't have approved the first one. So to be consistent, we sort of have to follow what's already gone. And if overall numbers don't increase wildly over existing numbers, then the danger to the public is not increased, however big the building is. And so that and certainly the range of the numbers, from what was it, 100 to 1,000 was a very big spread, and the sensitivity to make any further decisions. So given all the circumstances, and certainly there's nothing wrong with the building itself, and it's purely on to do with HSE comments that we have to make any decision. So I'm in favour of allowing this to go through, and on the understanding that they are not vastly going to increase numbers, totally beyond what they're doing at the moment. So a complete change of use would not be to something which has a greater population would not be acceptable. Given that they carry on as existing type of business, I think we're reasonably safe to allow it to go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, and I think obviously it'll be notified to the Scottish ministers, so that if there is a feeling that they wish to call it in, that is at their disposal. Can I just confirm that, Mr. Evans? You're on mute, Gavin.
Sorry, convener, my mouse cursor had gone to sleep.
Right.
Yes, that's quite right. So if members are minded to reverse the appointed officer's decision, we would now be obliged to notify Scottish ministers, and they would have, I think it's 21 days within which to consider whether they wanted to call it in for their own determination. They can ask to extend that period in writing, but we would just have to wait and see what the view they came to.
Okay, and I mean, and I can understand why, again, for consistency from our officer's point of view, why they would have put it forward in terms of being consistent with their own approach to that development to refuse it, because it was a decision that was overturned previously. But I think with the information that we've managed to get, which Councillor Bell requested, and also the review of the Atkins report again, I think we're agreed that we would overturn the officer's recommendation and have it referred to Scottish ministers. Mrs. McBain, do you require anything further from us?
No, that's fine, convener. So sorry, just to check that the application would be approved and you don't want to add any conditions, or do you want to?
Mr. Evans, is there anything that you believe is required?
I think really what we're saying is that members are minded to approve unconditionally, I think, and subject to that statutory notification to ministers.
There's nothing you feel we need to add in terms of conditions, because I think it was basically on the B6.
That's right. Yeah, there was no real policy conflict identified by the appointed officer. The building is very much taking its cue from or the extension is taking its cue from what's there. So you could be fairly reassured.
Okay, that's good. Okay, members, well, thank you. I know that's been quite a marathon today. I appreciate your time from the start of the site visit right through, and that concludes the LRB for today. And Mr. Evans, have a lovely birthday, and I promise I won't sing to you.
Off to a great start.
I know. All right, well, thank you.
Convener, apologies for keep on withdrawing from the meeting. I have no idea why it's been doing what it does do.
That's okay. It's gremlins in the system. We'll put it down to that. So thank you all very much for your attendance today.